see everyone. Thanks for coming. Give it another minute. Okay, let's get started. Let me just get my screens all settled. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world this morning. So I am so thrilled that you're here and to discuss well-being and the impact of mindfulness. I do hope you are all healthy and well, and we are for sure experiencing unprecedented times. So I am tremendously grateful that you all made the time to be here and put you and your child's well-being first. So first, let me take a minute just to check in. I just want you to, I'm going to share a Zoom poll that is anonymous, and I want you to tell me how you're feeling right now. So you're going to give yourself a number 1 to 5, 1 being optimistic and happy, right? And 5 being full of anxiety and or depression. So let me go ahead and launch that for you. And as I said, it's all anonymous. Okay. Take a minute to do that. Okay, so just so you all don't feel alone, there's lots of you coming in at a 4, there's even some 5s and some 3s, so that's good. And there are some 1 or 2s, that's great. Okay, all right, great. Just able to give me a good idea of how you're all feeling. So let me, I want you to tell me why you're here, right? So is it social interaction, right? You just want to hang out with some people? Are your kids filled with stress and anxiety and you're just not sure how to handle it? Or is it your own stress and your anxiety levels that are just far beyond what you can handle? Or are you just interested in mindfulness and just want to learn more about well-being? So let me launch that for you. Okay. I see some social interactions coming up already. Okay, we all need a little bit of connectedness, right? Especially with those of us that are, we're all in the same boat, especially parents. So it's great to connect. Okay. A lot here, of course, as parents, that their kids are filled with stress and anxiety. You're just not sure how to handle it. So I'm hoping that I'm able to give you some tips and strategies for that. Okay, so let me just share my screen with you. Great. Okay. So in this presentation, what we'll discuss is what is well-being, and then the current research, of course, and then best practices, which of course will include mindfulness. Okay, so just take a quick minute just to review our disclaimer. I just want to be sure that you all understand my intentions and goals, and that of course this information should not replace the advice of a physician. So just take a couple seconds with that. Okay, let's dive right in. So let me just share a bit of my background for those of you who don't know who I am. So I've been in education for 20 years as a teacher, grades 1 through 8. I've taught general ed, special ed, English as a second language, and drama. I taught in New York for many years. That's where I'm from. And then for about 9 or 10 years, I taught in international schools around the world. So in Budapest, in Shanghai, and most recently in Nuremberg. And my family and I just came back to the US about 1.5 years ago. I'm also a mom. Are there any other mothers out there? I know there's many of you here, and I wonder if you are experiencing the same mommy guilt and self-sabotage that I am. Right, we're trying to keep it together for our kids. I study more with them because I worry, are they missing out? I try to engage them in more meaningful quality activities every day, which is just a ridiculous goal, right? But we try as much as we can. So I get it. I understand what you're going through. You should also know I've had my own journey with well-being and anxiety, and therefore, while I know the research, I have this profound empathy for others that struggle with stress and anxiety. I worked with children's well-being and service learning because they both go hand in hand. In both China and New York, I ran several school programs on like girls empowerment, even animal welfare, and then of course, well-being. In the Shanghai community, I had the unique opportunity to run Child Core while simultaneously having somebody run it for me here in New York. And the kids were able to collaborate on different social emotional topics. It was so amazing to build these cultural bridges and having these children talk about resilience and empathy within their own cultures and throughout their own short life journeys. So incredible. And now I so gratefully, I'm the head of wellbeing and service learning at a school here in the US. So that's just a bit about my background in regards to well-being. So let me help you get even more present. I'd like to take you through a short breathing exercise. And if you want to turn your cameras off, if that makes you feel more comfortable, that's fine. This is called alternate nostril breathing. So it could get a little messy. So you're welcome to turn off your cameras. So, but what happens here is inhaling through the left nostril, right, triggers the rest and relaxation response, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. And then inhaling through the right triggers the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight-flight response. So by choosing which nostril you use to inhale, you can make yourself either more relaxed or more energized. So what this breath does is about bringing these two opposites into balance, right, by slowly and consciously through each nostril for an equal amount of time. And then we make sure to stimulate the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems in equal amounts. So let me show you how it works, and then we could do it together. So one thing you want to do when you're breathing, especially most of us are, let me fix my screen here for you. Most of us are at our desk, right? Most of the day, especially now if you're at home. So you're in a chair. So one thing you want to do when you're practicing your breathing is you want to keep both feet on the floor. This helps you be a little bit more grounded. I know I like to sit with my legs crossed, or actually sometimes I sit like crisscross applesauce. There's the elementary school teacher for you. But anyhow, you want to keep your both feet on the floor. And then what I tell my little ones is what you want to do is when you sit up, you remember Marionette Puppet, right? I was just watching Sound of Music during the holidays, and the scene with the marionette puppet. So anyhow, it's almost as if there's a string from your tush to the top of your head. And I know myself, I do it when I'm sitting for a long time. I do sit hunched over. So what you'll want to do is pull yourself up as though the string is from your tush to your head, and you're down here, and you'll just pull yourself up, right? Not so you're tense, right? Because that's not going to be any good for our breath, but just that you're sitting up kind of, floating a bit so the air can easily flow in and out. And then the other thing you want to remember is that a lot of people, when you say to breathe in deep, they go, and it's all up here, right? But we want to breathe down here in our bellies and in our lungs and our ribs, right? All over here. So when you breathe in, you want to make sure you're expanding here, right? And not up, right? Out, not up. So you're going to want to use your thumb and your ring finger for this breath, okay? And what you'll want to do, and you can join in with me whenever you feel comfortable. So you'll want to block off your right nostril, breathe in through the left, hold it, block the left, exhale through the right. Now, a lot of breathing, right, is done in through the nose, out through the mouth. Of course, in this nostril breathing, you're completely through the nose. Okay, so now let's block the right, hold, block, exhale. In, hold, block, exhale.
Be mindful of how you're sitting. Inhale. Hold. Block. Exhale. You ready? Feel like you're relaxing. Inhale. Hold. Block. Exhale. One more. Inhale. Hold. Block. Exhale. Interesting, right? It works so well. I love that breath. So let's move on. So let's begin with what is well-being, right? So it can be called heart-mind well-being, right? Which refers to the balance between educating the mind and educating the heart. There is this great focus in society on academic achievement, though there is this growing body of research that shows the positive impacts of well-being of our hearts and the way we relate to one another, and that social emotional development helps to improve academic success. And I'll talk more about the details and what the research has to say about why that is. Well-being has also been defined as a state of being comfortable and healthy and happy. And then CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, they've created 5 competencies to foster a successful state of well-being. And they include self-awareness, social awareness, right, which is a lot of what we're going through right now, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, and then self-management, right, the awareness and the management of your emotions. I know those are several definitions, but hopefully that'll give you, a framework of well-being. Okay. So as I just stated, there's this growing body of research that proves that social and emotional learning or well-being helps to improve academic success. So in fact, the research says that it can lead to an 11 percentile point gain on standardized achievement tests. Okay, why is this? So I wonder if you've heard of Karen Young. If you haven't, you need to. So let me tell you about her. She's a child and adolescent anxiety and neurodevelopment educator. And I'll speak more in depth of her work in a minute. But for now, what I'd like to share with you, she does a lot of Facebook Live videos. And in this one, I just pulled a snippet of it. It's 8 minutes, but it's completely worth it. She discusses the way to the learning brain. So how do we get our kids to learn successfully, and why the research that we just spoke about is true. So let me share that with you.
At the moment, our worlds are colliding and our roles are colliding too. So parents are finding themselves as teachers, back to parents, back to teachers, and it can be really tough. It's tough for our kids too, who aren't used to their parents being in the teacher role. Something to remember and something to keep in mind is the way to the learning brain isn't necessarily through the learning brain. It's actually through the emotional brain. So if you imagine the brain divided into 3 parts, and at the front is the thinking brain, it's the prefrontal cortex. In the middle that's the prefrontal cortex, it's the thinking brain, that's the part we want switched on for learning. It's part of the brain that can calm big emotions and problem solve, think, retrieve information, put it all together. We want that part of the brain for learning. Behind it is the emotional brain. Now, for the thinking brain to be able to do its job, it actually needs the backing of the emotional brain. So it needs the emotional brain to be relaxed and calm and not hijacking the brain when the feeling brain when feelings get too big or anxiety or stress gets too big. The feeling brain hijacks the brain. The first thing it does is it shuts down the thinking brain. So it is absolutely impossible. It's impossible for our children to learn anything when they're in big anxiety or big stress. It's just impossible. So the best thing we can do for our kids isn't always necessarily teaching them the stuff that they need to learn. That will often come when we provide the conditions that are conducive to that learning brain being switched on, active, and ready to kick some goals. The way we do that is through the emotional brain. Now, the emotional brain, what it needs to be able to do its job is safety and connection, safety and social support, safety through social support. So that means helping them to feel calm and relaxed through connection, through being a strong, steady, loving, warm parent ourselves. And that's why sometimes parents as teachers doesn't always go so well, because that anxiety can heighten in both of us. Because as parents, we are wired to become distressed when our kids are distressed. That's what loving parents do. It's meant to be there. It's meant to be that way, because when we're distressed, we're more likely to mobilize to meet their needs. But in times when they're learning, or when anxiety is kicking on, when it doesn't need to switch on, their anxiety is switching on when it doesn't need to, and it will switch on our anxiety and distress when it doesn't need to. Remembering that part of anxiety is fight. It's fight or flight. So that's why we can all get into arguments, however loving and supportive and nurturing our relationships with our kiddos are. When we go into teacher mode, it cannot always work out so well. So the best thing we can do for them is to nurture that learning brain and strengthen it by creating the conditions the brain needs to learn. That is by being calm, relaxed, connected. If you start to see their anxiety or their stress starting to peak, the brain needs a little bit of anxiety and stress to learn. A little bit is okay. It's when it is too much, too soon, or when it goes on for too long, it shuts down the thinking brain. So if you imagine we all have a baseline level of stress, and then we have a point where our stress goes through the roof, and that's when the thinking brain switches off. We want it to be within that threshold. So when they start to be approaching that upper level of stress, one of the ways we can support them is by encouraging them to take a 2-minute break. And the calming down after stress can happen in 2 minutes. It might be a 2-minute walk. It might be sending a text to a friend, that relational regulation. It might just be sitting and having a chat with us, kicking a ball outside. Movement is really great for calming an anxious brain and getting that learning brain ready. But connection with you is also massive in terms of supporting that learning brain. So if we think of this time that we're going through at the moment in isolation, it might not necessarily be the time where they are learning the content that they need to learn. But what we can certainly do is be strengthening them and priming their brain so it is so ready to learn. The brain learns, wires, and strengthens through experience. So this is a really great time for us to be able to do that, and not just strengthen it for the short term, but strengthen it for the long term as well. So lots of play where they're discovering and exploring themselves. Play for our teens too. They need to play. Opportunities to move, to get their body moving. If when they start to peak, they can take a few deep breaths or do some grounding. Just look around you. What do you see? What do you hear? What are you feeling outside your body? That's another way to bring the brain back down to calm. There can also be a really big temptation at the moment while we're homeschooling to get the work done really early. So just sit down for a big chunk and get it done. But it's just not how the brain learns best. The brain learns best when it takes small breaks. And that's because the brains are designed to be curious and to snap to attention when things are different, when there's a change. So if they are going to learn something difficult or something new, the best time for this is after a break. It's the first thing they do. Definitely not towards the end of a session or in the middle of a session if their anxiety is already peaking. So if they can have 2 or 3 minute breaks every 20, 30, 40 minutes, move around, do some strong, steady breathing, connect with you, connect with a friend, that's the way that they're going to regulate. Something for our teens that might be helpful is if they have to learn something difficult and they're really struggling with it, have them go over it before they go to sleep, as long as it's not going to interfere with their sleep, of course, because the brain really needs to be able to learn, really needs to have sleep to be able to learn the next day. Tired brains don't learn very well. But what happens if it can be something that they look over before they go to sleep? When we're asleep, the creative part of the brain becomes really active because the brain isn't using resources to do the things that we usually do during the day, like balancing or talking or eating or focusing. It's the creative brain is free to take a bit of rain. And that's why when you sleep on it, you've heard the saying sleep on it, and you wake up in the morning and you've got a different outlook on something, or you've come up with a solution to a problem, it's because while you're asleep, your brain can get busy creatively problem solving things. So that's just another way that might work for our teens. So the thing to remember during this time when we're isolating and finding ourselves doing things that we don't usually do, like being the teacher or teaching our children at home, the way to the learning brain isn't necessarily through the learning brain. The most powerful thing we can do for the learning brain is through the emotional brain, and making sure that is calm and relaxed, and making sure they are feeling connected and safe and happy. If they can be in a joyful state, that is a perfect state for the brain to learn. It's wired, it's ready, it's interested, it's curious. So play is really important: movement, sleep, and connection. And if we can do those things, even if we aren't able to teach them the content that they need to learn right now, that's okay, because there is something else that we can do, which is at least as important, I would say even more important, and that is giving their learning brain the foundations it needs to really move them forward, be open, curious, and ready for learning.
Okay, a lot there, right? She shared a lot. Let me get back to the screen. Okay, great. I wrote some notes as she was speaking. I've watched the video 100 times, but she says for parents to be calm, right? And you might have all had a giggle right at that moment. It's hard to be calm, especially as a parent, come teacher, right? Become a teacher. It's difficult, but I love the points of learning something new after a break. She talks about connection, talks about safety, talks about play and movement. For the older ones, learning before sleep, because that's when the creative brain is active. But I think the biggest focus here, right, is that the way to the learning brain is through the emotional brain. So Karen has a number of videos that can all be accessed on her Facebook page. But, she explains this idea of, it's also called the neurosequential network, that the brain works in sequence, right, through the feeling to the learning brain. We can't divorce the social emotional learning from the academics. She says here, it's just impossible. So I want you to just take 10 seconds to think about the research. Are you putting pressure on your child to succeed academically, right? We all are, I guess, in some way, right? Are you worried that they'll fall behind because of the pandemic? We all want our children to be successful in a variety of ways, right? But I hope that this research just sheds some light on the idea that their well-being must come first in order for them to learn successfully. I'd really encourage you to sit with your kids and figure out what supports their well-being, but more importantly, what takes away from their well-being, and help them schedule those things that support their well-being into their day or into their week. And if you're unsure, we'll talk more about it in a bit. So moving on. Okay, so what makes the feeling brain not quiet, right? Stress and anxiety, right? That's easy, no rocket science there. So I wonder, you don't have to let me know, but are there any of you that have children that suffer with anxiety? I can share with you one very important thing from my own journey with anxiety disorder. If you've never had it to the disorder degree, it's very hard for you to support someone that has. And I know that may make you feel powerless and will make you feel sad, but it's okay. We, right, us anxiety people, we don't expect you to, but I do encourage you to read up with it and connect your child with someone who truly does understand. And I'm about to go into depth for you. As I promised before, let me just tell you a bit more about Karen. She is this anxiety guru. She founded this very popular website called Hey Sigmund. Her articles focus on children and teen anxiety.
It's been translated into many languages. It's been published on various international sites. She is a consultant who I actually had the recent pleasure of meeting with live from Australia via Zoom. So let me just share a bit with you about anxiety from my own experience and some of the main points of my time with Karen. So, okay, long list here, but let's get through it. It's so important. So the first thing that Karen reminds us of is that kids with anxiety, right, or adults, right, are some of the bravest in the world. And she explains it so simple, is that because wherever there's anxiety, there's courage. And wherever there's courage, there's anxiety, right? Anxiety is an energy with nowhere to go, right? We all know it's that fight, flight, or freeze. Sometimes anxiety shows up in the moment, right, from an anxious situation, but sometimes it shows up for what seems like no reason, right? Sometimes I would be in a panic attack and whoever I was with would say like, what just happened? What are you nervous about? I don't know. I'm watching a TV show, or I was writing, or, you know, you have no idea. What that actually is a delayed anxiety. Sometimes what the brain can do is, a cognitive behavioral therapist explained it to me once as the brain throwing up, which for me, actually, that visual was brilliant and very comforting, because what it is that it's all this kind of built up anxious situations that your brain just says, I'm done, thank you very much, and vomits it all out, right? So sometimes when you're not sure what triggered your child, it may be something from the past. The other kind of anxiety is anticipatory anxiety, right? Usually after a panic attack, I would say for a couple of weeks, there's this anticipation of what if it happens again? Where am I going to be? What is it going to feel like? So there are all these different forms of anxiety. Unfortunately, and this was a very hard thing for me to accept, is that anxiety cannot be cured, but it can be managed. And for me, the best management came in the understanding, the why the anxiety happens, right? The neuroscience of it. And the basic neuroscience of it. You don't need to understand all the scientific details, but understanding what your brain is doing at that moment, and then you start to build this relationship with it. I'm happy to answer any personal questions on this if you have them. I feel like for me, living with anxiety and being able to speak about it and share my story has given me a purpose for it, which has comforted me, is that I'm able to now help others with it. So anxiety, let me start here. So anxiety, as Karen talked about earlier, it will lock up the thinking brain, right? Making it impossible to learn. So whether we're typical anxiety sufferers or not, right now, right, we're all experiencing some form of anxiety. So during COVID, right, the anxiety comes from the unpredictability, the unfamiliarity of it all, right? We're being told it's unsafe out there, yet we have to go out there, and we're putting our kids out there, right? So anxiety happens because it senses a threat, right? It happens as a response, usually to things that are important and meaningful to us. So what Karen suggested is that we help our kids reframe it. And I love this. It's so simple. Is this a threat? Or is this a time, or is this a response to something important or meaningful, right? And then we ask our kids to think about, is this a time to be safe? Or is this just a time to be brave, right? We turn the anxiety into an ally. So kids need to understand that anxiety happens to everyone, and it's okay. It's there to keep you safe. But when it holds you back from doing those important or meaningful things is when we need the support, right? I know this sounds scary, but it's about moving with it and not trying to rid of it, right? The more we fight against it, the more it's going to fight back. The more we accept it and walk with it, the more it'll dissipate. So a little bit of the neuroscience that I talked to you about before. So anxiety comes from the amygdala, right? Its job is to keep us safe. from threats. So it's constantly scanning the environment for threats. And then, of course, if it senses danger, it surges our body with those neurochemicals, right? The cortisol and the adrenaline. What happens then is the cortisol and adrenaline are there to help us fight or flee, right? But what those chemicals also do is create these physical symptoms, right? There's butterflies, the rapid heartbeat, the sweating, muscle pain. And Karen said, which is so interesting, is that she reminded us that in primitive times, right, that was all okay because danger usually was physical. But now danger is more psychological, right? Or something like COVID, right, that we can't fight or outrun, right? The psychological, like, especially for our teens, right, the judgment, the exclusion, the failure, the criticism, the making mistakes, separation, and the amygdala, the great, not so great thing about the amygdala is that it doesn't care if the threat is real. And she came up with this incredible analogy of that the amygdala is like the smoke alarm in your house, right? So it's going to go off whether toast is burning or the house is burning down. So it doesn't care whether or not the threat is real or not. So again, going back to those questions, is this a time for me to be safe or a time for me to be brave? Is it just the toast burning or is the house really burning down? You know, and the reason why the thinking brain shuts down is because the amygdala doesn't want you to think, right? If the house is burning down, there's no thinking, you're running, right? So this, that idea kind of proves what we were talking about before. And then you engage the thinking brain after the big feelings are over. Okay. So what do we do? So one thing that I always relied on was the acronym HALT. Okay, it helped me decide whether my bodily symptoms or sensations or were anxiety or not. So HALT is hungry, angry. You all know hangry, right? Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and scared. And tired. That was such an aha moment for me many years ago. You have to get the proper amounts of rest because the amygdala will actually register threat more easily with a lack of sleep. You know, so for me, that comforted me. You know, when I knew, oh, I barely slept last night, that's why. There's nothing wrong. There's no what if. I'm just tired. And my brain is actually registering threat more easily. And it's comforting. And I'm able to let go of the anxiety because of that understanding. So what you want to do is keep your kids moving forward little by little, right? You want to try really hard not to let them avoid if possible. As good parents, we want to steer our kids away from danger. We want to keep them safe, right? But the avoidance actually enables and catastrophizes the threat. So, I mean, of course, I'm speaking of anxiety and not a real threat, but the amygdala learns from experience. So if you can support them through the anxiety, it will eventually lift, and then the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and then so will the thinking part of the brain. So you can try things, and I'm going to give you a list in a minute of strategies, but you want to try things like breathing techniques, some type of rhythmic walking, physical touch, right? Just a hug, right? Physical touch releases oxytocin, right? We all know that. So just a hug is really helpful. And Karen speaks about matching the intensity so that the amygdala buys it. Now, hear me out. This is so incredibly helpful. You want to validate your kids' feelings. Don't try to calm them down immediately and tell them everything will be fine, because the amygdala won't buy it, right? And I have to be honest with you in telling you that whenever I was having a panic attack and someone told me, oh, you're being ridiculous. Oh, you're fine. What's wrong with you? You're fine. Everything's okay. I can promise you it only made me feel so much worse. I know that their intent, of course, was loving, but it's not what an anxious person needs to hear, because we are actually sure that everything is not fine. So you can try things like, for kids, right? I know you must feel yucky right now. I can I can see that you're scared. Let's talk about it, give them a hug, and then have them take those baby steps towards that important or meaningful thing and just encourage them forward. For now, if they're afraid to go to school, okay, you want to arm them with the knowledge that they already have, right? One thing you want to do is focus them on something that they have to look forward to when they come home, okay? Super important. That's even, excuse me, I'll talk about that with my students later today, is focusing on something that you'll look forward to each day. Just keeps you in a positive mind frame. And then, like I said before, remind them of all the safety measures that are in place. You arm them with the knowledge they have. You're going to wear your mask. Your teacher's going to socially distance. You're going to wash your hands. You have all of this armor to protect you, and it's going to be okay. So the next thing that I had learned about through Karen is a study done by Dr. Lawrence Cohen. I'm not really sure the name of it. I call it the second chicken, and I think Karen calls it that as well. But you can read up on it for more details. But basically, it was this study that looked at scared chicken and their ability to be resilient. So when the scared chicken saw another scared chicken, it was much more reluctant to move forward. But when the scared chicken saw another happy chicken pecking around, it realized that there was no danger, and they were able to be calmed more quickly. So interesting. So we have to be the calm second chicken for our kids so that they can see that they are safe, right? And then we can connect with them and we can redirect them. Right now, most of us as parents also probably have an anxious brain, and that's okay. We need to try to connect with someone in our own lives that could be our second chicken, right? And I'm not by any means, let me clarify, I'm not by any means suggesting that you lie to your children if you're anxious. In fact, I think sharing with them that you're anxious too is okay. It will make them feel less alone. I tell this to teachers as well. If you're having a bad day, you can share that with your students. It gives them permission to feel too. You just want to share from a place of strength and confidence. So mindfulness and gratitude are great ways to start the day that calm the activity in the amygdala and strengthens activity in the learning brain. So just infusing moments of mindfulness are not only powerful, they are quite simple. So let's move forward and talk further about that. Okay, so what is mindfulness, right? And how do we calm the emotional brain? How do we get in the right state to successfully access the learning brain? So what I want to share with you now is just a bit of a TED Talk with mindfulness expert Joe Pang. And I really encourage you to watch the entire TED Talk. It's so helpful. But what I've done is, especially in being in my position in researching about social emotional learning and emotional intelligence and these kinds of things, there is so much out there and there are so many experts. But what I'm trying to do for you here is I've looked at all of them and I'm trying to put the best of the best in here to share with you so you can kind of, weed out, just so you get the best of the best. But so I encourage you to watch Joe Pang's full TED Talk. But what he does here is he describes his experience with mindfulness, and he also takes us through a mindfulness exercise. And I would love, if you're comfortable, to participate. So let me share with you here.
So I'd like to share with you today a framework in 4 steps on how mindfulness transforms us, both from my own experience and the experiences of many who have been doing this practice for over 2,500 years. So the first step is like the gateway of mindfulness. It's coming to this heightened realization that the new kicks, the girlfriend, even getting an A boarding group on Southwest, don't actually bring you sustained inner peace and happiness. You're happy for a bit, and then you get used to it, and then you're on to something else. And then on top of that, everything ends, breaks, or dies. So no wonder it is so hard to be happy as a human when there is always something between you and happiness. And so many people live their whole lives in a habit of believing that if only I become less or more this or have more of that, then I'll be happy. So when people come to meditation, this represents a willingness to step outside of this endless cycle of if only, to practice being present with who we are and what we have right now. So I'd like to invite you to try this practice out with me, because in the same way that I can't talk at you about playing piano and then you become a virtuoso, I can't talk at you about mindfulness and then you become more mindful. Unfortunately, the brain doesn't work like that. So through neuroplasticity, our brain actually develops based on how we use it. And so when we practice mindfulness through meditation, our brain develops its capability to be mindful and compassionate. And that's really why it is a practice and not a philosophy or magic. It's accessible to everyone. And so let's try out this practice. And to start, I'll just ask that you close your eyes. And this just helps bring attention inward. And just feel what it feels like to be in this body, in this space, and in this moment. Bringing your attention to your breathing in this body. So following it as you breathe in and breathe out. And breathing in again. And breathe out. The breath is always present and a reliable place to come back to. Just continuing to follow your breathing. And you might notice thoughts like to take your attention away. And so all you have to do when you notice that happens is observe where your mind went and then come back to your breath. Learning how to come home to who you are. And now taking one more mindful breath and opening your eyes. So for some of you, that might have felt nice. For others, that might have felt awkwardly long. And for most of you, you probably noticed a lot of thoughts, and that's actually part of the practice. So as we continue to practice, we become really conscious of what takes us away from inner peace and happiness. Because when we meditate, we try to be present. And then we notice all of the thoughts and the motions and our top 10 tunes that really like to get in the way of that. It's as though the waves of the mind start to settle enough for us to see more clearly what's going on underwater. And rather than our normal life where we're too distracted to notice, we ignore it, or we get really caught up in it, we learn how to notice it, to gain insight from it, and to let it pass. And that starts to create space for us to choose our response from a wiser place.
Okay. Okay, so let's go back. There we are. Okay, terrific. So you can see the screen. Okay, so I hope that that exercise was enjoyable for you. So what is mindfulness? So the easiest way to explain it, right, is as Joe suggests, it creates this space between you and your emotions. So we want you to notice your emotions, to gain insight from them, and then allow them to pass. That is not to say the feeling or having emotion is not okay, but how much we allow those feelings to impact our lives is where the problem could lie. So as Joe mentioned, creating this space, that gives us the opportunity to manage the feelings, so to ensure that they serve us best. So it's a way of focusing the mind so that it's fully attending to what's happening right now, to what we're doing, and to the space that we're currently in. And cultivating mindfulness means to be present, right? to pay attention and to be aware of our emotions, but most importantly, the way that we respond to our emotions. Okay. Okay, so there are a plethora of resources out there, especially now. They're all on the web. What I've done, and I'll share them on the Facebook page, hopefully later today. I've listed a few of them here. There's videos. There are scripts. I know my daughter is on her iPad way too much. There are excellent children's mindfulness videos, so at least you feel like your kids are getting quality time on their iPad. And there are guided meditation scripts that you can easily read to them. And then in addition, on this list, there's some of my favorite researchers. Okay, links to Karen Young, who we've talked about. Another guru you must research is Mark Brackett. He is the director of Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. He's just written the book, Permission to Feel. It's brilliant. And then also the Child Mind Institute. So links to all those are here. And again, like I said, I'll put them on the Facebook page. But don't forget also, right, human connection, right? And just positive human qualities like empathy, compassion, self-compassion, the most important one, forgiveness, trust, gratitude. These are all things that can be cultivated through intentional everyday experiences. And this will influence your health and well-being. So I just mentioned self-compassion. That's really a biggie. It reduces anxiety. It reduces the activity actually in the anxiety center. Self-kindness through breathing. There's something called, I don't have it up here, but it's called hand on heart. And I'll do it with the kids later in the afternoon, but you're just basically putting your hand on your heart and doing what I explained before, keeping your feet on the floor, pulling yourself up like a marionette puppet. And you're just kind of taking yourself through a breathing exercise of just kind of closing your eyes and what can you smell, what can you hear, and just being mindful of your breath and understanding, your emotion in that moment and just breathing through it. Then writing positive self-affirmations, gratitude journals. There's also, I know for me, a silver lining to the pandemic, which might sound strange, is this idea of community, right? That we're all going through this. So while we may be physically isolated, for me, it's been comforting knowing that, many of us are going through this, that I'm not alone. And then treat yourself as your best friend, right? And this is kind of pandemic or no pandemic. What would you say to your anxious best friend? How would you comfort your anxious best friend, all right? So you'll want to do that for yourself. And then of course, mindfulness exercises. There's so many apps out there now. And then of course, the scripts I've listed here. So let's move on. Okay, recent neuroscience, right? Research proves the many benefits of mindfulness meditation, right? And they're listed here: increased focus, sense of calm, decreased stress, decreased anxiety, improved impulse control, greater empathy for others, and improved conflict resolution skills. So children need the opportunity to practice mindfulness, right? The human mind naturally wanders from the present, right? Our brains have a tendency to become focused with thoughts on the past or the present, the past or the future. And this, of course, this kind of thinking will provoke anxiety. So academic pressure now affects kids as early as kindergarten. Isn't that sad? And the pressure, of course, only grows greater in middle school and high school. Surveys have actually found that students are reporting stress and fatigue as much as 75% of the time, right? Aren't they just too young for that kind of stress? So what's needed is a way to decrease the anxiety and help students to manage their emotions and mindfulness, right? Okay, so I saved the best for last. So you first, right? So, right, all parents say, what, me first? I'm a mom, right? Or I'm a dad, or I'm a teacher, right? Why me first, right? It's always the kids first. You probably haven't put yourself first in a long time. So we're going to watch this video. It's about 4 seconds, I think. I just want to share it with you to see why.
And then Then they explain what happens if there's a drop in oxygen. The masks will come down. And then what? You put your mask on first. Only once yours is fixed on properly should you help your neighbors. Even if you're a parent, even if it's the love of your life next to you, you put your mask on first, because otherwise you'll run out of air too.
Something so simple, right? I bet most of us have seen that on the airplane, right? Put your mask on first, even if it's the love of your life, because, right, then you won't be able to help those that you love. So this quote here that I just posted from Maya Angelou, I love it. It reminds us, right, that when we're younger, right, it's all about me. And as we get older, right, it's about we. So I want you to think about if there's a congruence between how you are feeling and how your kids are feeling. So I know if I've had a rough day at work and I come home cranky, you know, suddenly my daughter's cranky. And you're like, darn, you know. But that is because adult well-being is contagious and it influences the well-being and the happipiness of the children with whom we interact. So there was actually a study done here in 2016 for teachers that researchers found that teachers' occupational stress was linked to students' physiological stress regulation. So they found that children's morning cortisol levels significantly varied between classrooms. And they found that higher levels of classroom teacher burnout significantly predicted the variability in that morning cortisol, right? And this is applicable to parents as well. These facts are for sure not to put guilt on you. God knows we have enough of that. But it's just so you are aware. Stress is normal, especially now. Okay, so no guilt. We are actually not equipped to handle this type of prolonged stress. We need to take care of ourselves first so we can best take care of our children. So finally, I will leave you with this. After you leave today, what I'd like for you to reflect on are ways that you take care of your own well-being. It is definitely not a one-size-fits-all. What is it for you, right? Maybe it is, you know, typical meditation or yoga, super helpful. I do it every week. Maybe for you, it's a run. Definitely not for me. Maybe it's spending more time with friends. Maybe it's music. I find a lot of peace in music. I also find a lot of peace in a great Netflix binge. Probably not the healthiest, but it helps. So think about what is it for you, right? Be mindful what adds to your well-being, right? I told you to do this with your kids earlier, but you need to do it for yourself as well. What adds and supports to your well-being, but also be mindful of what takes away from it. And then be sure to schedule in those feel-good activities. What I've actually done is on my Google Calendar, I have scheduled in those activities that support my well-being. And it's something, I do it so it's manageable so that I will be successful. So I'm not doing yoga every single day. I'm not meditating every single day. I'm not exercising every single day. I do maybe, you know, two to 3 days a week of yoga, 2 to 3 days a week of meditation, right? These kinds of things. So it's manageable, right? So I can do it. So I could be successful at it. So I just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to be here and putting yourself and your family's well-being first. Please know that this doesn't end here. I will be hosting a kids book club. I'm so excited for that. And then after that will be a social emotional program that will all be live, right? Because what's most important right now is that we're building relationships. So I'd love to build relationships with your children. So you'll want to look for those details coming on the Facebook page in the coming days. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop recording now just for your privacy. But I want to take some time to have some discussions and answer some questions you might have. And if there is a question that you just don't feel comfortable asking in the group, you can always contact me through Facebook via Messenger on the Child Core Facebook page. Or embarrassingly, you can reach me through email on childcore@aol.com. Yes, I'm still on AOL. We're moving forward. But anyhow, thank you so much. And I'm going to stop the recording now, and I look forward to all your questions. Thanks again.